You find yourself driving through West Virginia, passing through the Appalachian Mountains, and as you continue your drive, you find yourself on Asylum Road. You enter the building located on 26.5 acres of land in Weston, not sure what to expect. Will you experience what so many others before you have reported? Roaring screams in the dead of night, the cold clanking of steel cages, lost souls screaming for attention and redemption, Civil War soldiers, heart attack victims, murderers. This place does have a little bit of everything. Hey kids, welcome home. For today's paranormal pit stop, we're going to look into a location that generated a lot of buzz when it was first announced. This location has been covered by the likes of ghost investigator staples like Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures, Destination Fear, and Portals to Hell. That's right, kids. Put your seatbelts on and prepare for a bumpy ride. We're heading to the Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. Following consultations with Thomas Story Kirkbridge, the then superintendent of the Pennsylvania Hospital for the Insane, the Allegheny Lunatic Asylum was authorized in the early 1850s. The asylum was designed by Baltimore architect Richard Snowden Andrews, fashioning it after both Gothic and Tudor Revival styles. It was built with the Kirkbridge plan in mind, which called for long, rambling wings arranged in a staggered formation, the purpose of which was to ensure that the connected structures would receive therapeutic sunlight and fresh air in abundance, which was meant to assist in the treatment of the patients. It is considered to be the longest hand-cut stone masonry building in North America and the second largest in the world. Construction of the asylum began late in 1858 along the West Fork River, with the initial construction conducted by prison and slave laborers, as emancipation of the African American race through the abolishment of slavery was still 7 years away. According to Wikipedia, construction was interrupted by the outbreak of the American Civil War in 1861. Following its secession from the United States, the government of Virginia demanded the return of the hospital's unused construction funds for its defense. Before this could occur, the 7th Ohio Volunteer Infantry seized the money from a local bank, delivering it to Wheeling. It was put towards the establishment of the reorganized government of Virginia, which sided with the northern states during the war. The reorganized government appropriated money to resume construction in 1862. Following the admission of West Virginia as a U.S. state in 1863, the hospital was renamed the West Virginia Hospital for the Insane. The first patients were admitted in October of 1864, but construction continued into 1881. The 200-foot central clock tower was completed in 1871, and separate rooms for black people were completed in 1873. The hospital was intended to be self-sufficient, and a farm, dairy, waterworks, and cemetery were located on its grounds, which ultimately reached 666 acres in area. The very first patient of the asylum was a housewife who was admitted in October of 1864, suffering from, quote, domestic trouble. According to the staff logbook, she was admitted for such alarming, note the sarcasm, conditions as grief, congestion of the brain, feebleness of intellect, seduction, and novel reading. Well, I'd be screwed. According to legendsofamerica.com, in the early days, asylums were seen as repositories for more than just the insane. In many cases, people were committed for ridiculous reasons such as laziness, religious enthusiasm, menopause, superstition, domestic trouble, masturbation, and tuberculosis. Asylums were often the dumping ground for society's unwanted. Interestingly, the asylum offered money to anyone who dropped off a patient. many of whom showed no signs of mental illness when they were first committed. This would only further complicate the issues that the asylum would later find themselves in. Allegheny, whose name would later in 1863 be changed to the West Virginia Hospital for the Insane upon the state of West Virginia gaining control, and again changed in 1913 to the Weston State Hospital, was designed to house 250 patients comfortably, allowing each to have their own room. However, in 1881, the number of mental health cases around the country were growing at an exponential rate. In the 19th century, there was a much larger stigma around mental health, and instead of seeking counseling or assistance from a mental health professional, those suffering from any range of mental health conditions were tossed into mental asylums and were forgotten about. Allegheny was no exception, and soon found itself in excess of an additional 500 patients that it did not have room for. The asylum, unable to keep up with the influx of patients, soon found themselves stuffing as many as 5 or 6 patients in one room. Those who weren't quote-unquote lucky enough to have a room would sleep on floors and in hallways. There were so many bodies crammed in that conditions declined greatly. Malnutrition ran rampant. Cleanliness became nearly impossible to maintain, and according to an article posted by the Socians, ugly brownish black sludge covered the bog and bright windows, darkening the inside and hence freezing the rooms even more. The wallpaper had come off, animal-like scratches all over the walls caused by the patient's panic and condition. There was a sense of loneliness felt by the patients as they were in a rural area far from friends and family, housed among strangers, and forbidden to have visitors. They were not even allowed to receive gifts or mail of any kind, including letters from anyone from the outside world. And that was the least of the patients' concerns. Patients that were considered a higher risk were placed in cages in an effort to create more free space. These unstable patients were considered a perfect opportunity for experimentation. The, quote, healing tactics of the 19th century would be considered anything other than ideal and would, in fact, by today's standard, be deemed quite barbaric. Methods such as bloodletting, insulin coma therapy, seclusion in confinement cells would be just a few elicited to attempt to control the more violent patients. There were also innocent victims who found themselves suffering at the hands of doctors and nurses who had misdiagnosed and thus improperly medicated them. Many would lose their lives due to the improper practices, unsanitary conditions, and overpopulations, and would then end up in an unmarked grave in the back of the property on a lonely hillside, and there they would remain for the rest of eternity. The decline in care would continue for decades. By 1938, the asylum was more than 6 times over capacity. Food supplies were low, rooms were freezing, bodies huddled together on floors. The grime and sludge on the walls continue to lead to unsanitary conditions. There have been several instances over the years that led to this decline in conditions. In 1945, Walter Freeman, a surgeon and lobotomy advocate who would set up shop, so to speak, in the asylum, would become well known for his development of the transorbital or ice pick lobotomy, in which a pick is driven through the thin bone of the eye socket. The pick is then manipulated within the socket to damage the prefrontal lobes and sever the connective tissue in the frontal lobe of the brain. All this done while the patient is under a simple local anesthetic. Freeman was such a believer in lobotomy surgery that it is rumored that in 1952, in what would later be called Operation Ice Pick, 228 lobotomies would be performed over a 2-week period. The after effects on the patients led to many damages, both long and short term. Some of the side effects, as listed on livescience.com, include increased temperature, vomiting, bladder and bowel incontinence, eye problems, apathy, lethargy, and abnormal sensations of hunger. It is also reported that there was a significant change in the personality, behaviors, and ability to independently function in the patients after the lobotomy was performed. And that's if they survived, which, let's face it, with over 4,000 reported lobotomies being performed at the asylum over the years, and a mortality rate of approximately 5%, well, you do the math. In 1949, the Charleston Gazette would report for the first time on the conditions of the asylum, claiming poor sanitation, insufficient furniture, lighting, and heating. The overcrowding would lead to staff inability to handle the large population of patients, and the increase in tensions and violence that would break out amongst the patients, several of which resulted in patient deaths. In one particularly nasty instance, 2 patients took offense to another patient and attempted to hang him using a set of bed sheets. When the pair noticed that their nemesis was still breathing and that their plan was not working, they then cut the patient down and proceeded to use the metal bed frame to repeatedly crush his skull until, at last, they were successful in their mission. The staff themselves would not be immune to the violence that surrounded them, and it was reported that several female employees were raped over the years. Many would also report being attacked while on duty. In one instance, a nurse was reported missing during her shift. No one seemed to know what had happened to her, until 2 months later, when at the bottom of an unused staircase, her rotting corpse would be discovered. In 1960, there would be an addition in the form of a medical center and a morgue. In 1985, the Charleston Gazette would again try to shed light on the abhorrent conditions of the asylum, this time reporting that court-appointed inspectors found the asylum to be, quote, dirty and unkempt, with many patients left naked and confined in dirty wards, with bathrooms smeared with feces. The story went, for the most part, ignored, which led to a third reporting by the Charleston Gazette in 1992, where they again expressed their concern of the appalling conditions of the asylum. It would be that same year that Brian Scott B. would sadly commit suicide. B's badly decomposed body would not be discovered by staff for 8 long days. Finally, in 1994, after 130 years and over 2,000 known and reported deaths, the asylum would be forcibly closed, citing unethical treatment of patients and the facility's deteriorating physical condition. After this, the asylum would remain vacant until 2007, when it would be auctioned off to a gentleman by the name of Joe Johnson for $1.5 million. Its name was then resorted back to the original Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum and would also convert its purpose. It now hosts historic and paranormal tours and, of course, offers ghost haunts in the evenings. And under the 200-foot clock tower, a museum has been installed. Within the museum are carefully curated reconstructions of the original patient rooms from the many decades of operation, from the 1870s to the 1960s. Many of the patient wards remain untouched and offer a chilling step back in time. One can walk through the decaying hallways and see for themselves the cages patients were stuffed into, the isolation cells with rusted chains to restrain the more violent patients, and feel for themselves the overwhelming sense of fear and abandonment that were prevalent. With so many cases of violence, illness, and death reported over the years, the tales of hauntings and eerie experiences reported on the grounds of Trans-Allegheny are numerous. From the sounds of restless souls weeping to the squeaky wheels of gurneys being pushed down the hallways, the overpopulation of the location seems to continue, even under the illusion of being vacant. And with that, we'll take a look at the more chilling tales floor by floor. The first floor of the building, also the oldest part of the hospital, is called the Civil War Wing, and has also been referred to as the Veterans Area. It would then be assumed that this area of the hospital would be haunted by the soldiers of this war. However, this area seems to be the preferred stomping ground of an angry, violent spirit by the name of Ruth, who apparently has quite the distaste for men. When men are present in this area, Ruth will become enraged and is said to throw things at the men. Several people have reported being pushed against walls and hearing faint whistling sounds emanating from the hallway. The second floor is the home of Ward 2, which was used primarily as the men's ward back in the day and is known for its reports of shadow figures, voices yelling for visitors to get out, and even whispering their names to them as they investigate the halls. The shadow figures are often reported as being seen near a room where it was reported that a patient was stabbed by a fellow patient in excess of 17 times. The third floor was the location of the infamous incidents we spoke of earlier, in which the two patients attempted, unsuccessfully, to hang their fellow patient, whose name was Dean, and I won't remind you of how they remedied their failure. On this floor, more shadow figures and strange noises are reported, and several tour guides report to seeing the apparitions of nurses and of Dean himself wandering the ward. Disembodied screams, strange noises, footsteps, doors opening and closing by themselves, and chilling whispers are some of the further claims of tour guides, participants, and investigators that have dared to explore the third floor. The most terrifying of reports of haunting come from the fourth floor, which is also known for having taken the brunt of a fire that erupted in 1935. Due to the damage caused by the flames, the floors had to be replaced, and instead of being replaced with concrete, a wooden floorboard was installed, which would lead to footstep noises increasing. As you walk down the hallways to Ward R, you may just encounter the ghost of Lily, a child patient during the Civil War era who passed away due to pneumonia at the age of 9. The facts remain foggy as to whether Lily was abandoned to the hospital by her parents, or if she in fact was the byproduct of one of the many reported rapes that occurred over the years, and that her mother was in fact one of the many committed patients. It is said that if you step into her playroom, that you will hear her cries of pain and loneliness, and sometimes laughter, as she is, after all, just a child at play, and she just wants someone to come in and play with her. She continues to reside in the only home she has ever known, looking for a playmate. What is quite possibly the most terrifying of creatures encountered at Allegheny can also be found on the fourth floor. And it is not a mistake that I use the term creature. This horrifying apparition is referred to as the creeper. The creeper apparently crawls in an inhuman way across the floor, one person even referring to it as slinking. It appears as a black blob with no real distinguishable shape, and is often accompanied by the sounds of someone or something banging on the pipes. The echoes of the past ring loud and clear through the many winding halls of this dilapidated old building. It now serves one purpose: to provide a glimpse into its terrifying history for those who dare take a glimpse behind the veil. In an effort to take a look at some of the more significant evidence captured during the numerous investigations that have taken place at Allegheny, I'm lucky enough to be joined by the one and only J.Cam. He's going to provide us his insights and share the more chilling pieces of evidence that have been captured within the confines of the asylum, and I'm super excited to see what he found.
This is my part of the video, and in this part we're going to be looking at the investigations of the Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. The first of 3 investigations we're going to be looking into tonight is from a TV show called Paranormal Lockdown, and the name of the episode is Intense Investigation at the Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. As you can imagine, it is very dramatized, seeing as it is reality TV. There's lots of sound effects, there's lots of royalty-free, scary ambience, and fair enough, we can all see why reality TV is dramatized. It makes it more entertaining, but it does make it one of the less trustworthy sources. The episode doesn't really have anything rock solid. However, there was one instance where they did catch some kind of entity on camera. They managed to capture some footage of someone or something crawling or kind of slithering across the floor behind them, and if you turn up the brightness, it is definitely there, but it is unfortunately very, very unclear. Now, I'm not saying that they did, but there is a slim chance that they may have faked it for drama. Again, it's a very slim chance that they did. They seem like a reliable source, but there is a very big difference between reality and reality TV. Nothing is rock solid, take from that what you will, but the next 2 sources are from independent researchers and are probably a lot more reliable. The next one is a nameless written article from portcityparanormal.com, and I'm just going to read you the highlights because it's quite long, but there is definitely some very juicy. Why did I say juicy? Although public investigations are not the best circumstances for research, we really wanted to experience the Allegheny Lunatic Asylum for ourselves and to record our investigation. We came home with striking evidence of paranormal activity. As we continued to review our recordings for more evidence, we found that this haunted asylum was extremely active the night we were there. We quite by accident caught this extraordinary paranormal video clip of a man dressed in only a patient gown wandering the ward. We are still searching for the history of the patients that lived in the Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. Now that there sounds incredible, but you're not gonna like this. The Facebook page for Port City Paranormal was taken down when this article came out and the video was released. That's kind of spooky. I'm just gonna say it. That's kind of weird. Now there are loads of reasons that a Facebook page like this could be taken down, but when it's taken down at exactly the time that they have a paranormal video come out, I would like to believe that it's some kind of extraordinary entity that took it down manually. I know. It's a stretch, but I'm a believer in the paranormal, and I would love to believe that something like that happened. But regardless, the video was taken down and we can't watch it, and I scoured the internet for it. It's gone. However, we're not moving on to the other one just yet because they have at least attached some pictures and some audio recordings. The pictures are on screen now, and make of them what you will, but one of the audio recordings is very interesting to me. All of the other audio recordings are kind of just ambience that you would expect to hear in a place like that, but listen closely to the end of this one. Now, whatever sound that was is way too melodic and in tune to happen by coincidence or by accident. And it's also way too clear to be coming out of someone's phone or a speaker somewhere, so until proven otherwise, I'm very much considering this paranormal activity coming from the Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. And look, I know it's definitely not a lot of evidence, but if you have any ideas what that sound was, please feel free to put them in the comments, because I'm sure everybody would be interested to know anything about that noise. Lastly, we have another written article by an independent researcher called "I Spent the Night in a Haunted Asylum and I Still Can't Believe What I Saw." Again, this is long, so I will just read you the highlights and you can make of it what you like. Julia and I set up in a room allegedly haunted by a spirit named Jim James. We placed a flashlight on the floor and asked Jim to turn it on. The flashlight was Julia's, but I inspected it and it seemed totally ordinary. A few beats passed and then it came on. By itself. I offered Jim a cigarette to turn it back off again, and then it went dark. By 4:30 a.m, I was ready to go, and as I drove away, I thought about whether or not I actually believe what happened. I've always been fascinated by ghosts, but am I convinced that they exist? Honestly, no. Maybe Jim James did turn on that flashlight, or maybe there's some mechanical explanation. I just don't know. And what's more exciting than the unknowable? Ironically, this article kind of seems like it's grasping at straws to prove that there isn't paranormal activity. Flashlights don't turn on and off by themselves, and even if they did, what are the odds of it turning on and off when you put it in the middle of a room for a ghost to do that very thing. And I get that the author is trying to rationalize things, but it's kind of interesting that he would expect the flashlight to do that by itself before he believes that someone else did it. Regardless, I can't help but express my own opinion on this kind of thing because it fascinates me, but don't let my opinion shift yours. Come up with whatever you like. But yeah, that's my segment. Thank you very much, Press Start Mom, for having me on, and I would love to speak to you guys soon. You're all cool, and I'll speak to you in a bit. Don't use Redbubble. Bye.
In preparing for this video, I was asked by Jim, aka Night Dogs, just what it was about this particular location that made me want to include it in this little road trip of ours. And the first thing that came to mind was the sheer amount of tragedy that plagued it through all of its 130 years. Despite its several name changes from the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum to the West Virginia Hospital for the Insane to Weston State Hospital, and inevitably back again, and no matter how they attempted to disguise the truth of the atrocities that were occurring inside the walls, the slow decline and degradation of not just the physical walls, but also of the sense of humanity of those committed within its walls, would not be ignored. The over 2,000 souls refused to let their stories fall to the wayside and just become myths, legends, mere stories. They are literally crying out and asking for us to listen. What could not be cured by the staff of nurses and doctors, and the evils of Walter Freeman and his ice pick in their lives, maybe we can grant them in death by telling their stories, by refusing to forget them, by remembering that the only way that we can move away from the horrors of the past is if we learn from them. I hope today's paranormal pit stop lived up to your expectations. It was both interesting and heartbreaking to look into this one, and as always, there is no way I could have done it alone. Special thanks goes out to the immensely talented, kind, and exceedingly patient Jim Night Dogs Pagel for always being willing to be a true mentor. I may never achieve the legacy that you're creating, but I will continue to shoot for the moon and hope that maybe, just maybe, I can instead land among the stars. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. And, of course, a very heartfelt and special thank you to J.Cam for collabing with me on this one. I respect both your work and the effort that you always put into your videos, and it was absolutely a blast being able to put our heads together and blend our two styles together. We actually make a pretty good team, and I would be more than happy to work with you again any time you want to, my friend. Of course, I will have a link to his channel in the description of this video. Please, guys, go give this kid a sub. He's brilliant, he's talented, and he's just an all-around good guy. And it could not go unsaid that I owe a very big and another heartfelt thank you to the photographer Walter Arnold for his graciously allowing me to use his hauntingly beautiful work in this video. He is an exceedingly gifted photographer, and I encourage all of you to visit the links in the description of this video to check out his work for yourself. His still images truly capture the life that once existed in the walls of the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, and he does it in a truly remarkable way. And last but in absolutely no way least, thank you to each and every one of you for showing your continued support. I couldn't keep doing this without all of you, and it means more than you know that you're all a part of this journey with me. And if you're watching for the first time, I hope that you enjoyed this enough to consider giving this video a like, and it would of course mean the world to me if you subscribed to be a part of the Press Start family. We may be small, but we are all heart. Thank you all, truly, and good night.